Let me just explain how this idea for this project evolved. It has to do with this course that I was trying to pull together like 10 years ago. And the idea was to bring together economic, business, and labor history. There wasn't really a course like that here, and it's been something that I've wanted to do. It's my background, although I also trained an environmental historian. It also seemed the time to do it. It seemed like a timely thing that the students at Stony Brook needed to get. And as it moved, it was a little bit of a mishmash at first, but it came to be centered around the history of this famous, infamous income gap. I'm sure you've all heard of that in the news and, Occupy Wall Street and so on. But this was sort of in the early years when the economists like Paul Krugman are talking about this and giving it a name, but there wasn't a whole lot of to do about it. And there weren't many materials to work with. One of the key themes of this course is the financialization of the American economy. Financialization. That means that more and more of the wealth of our economy during a time of income gap, a rising income gap, is produced within the financial sector as opposed to the manufacturing sector, the service sector of the economy. Financialization got this course that to bring that home to the students is really strange country, financial history. And unless students have actually invested in stock, of course, stock market is one of the key financial markets. In fact, in many ways, the key one historically. So this was something that also I would poll the students. Very few of them had any experience with this. Other problems that I was trying to solve here, economic history, you mention this to the students and start talking about economics, and their eyes start to glaze over. It's something that seems kind of abstract from them, and when you talk about income gaps, I mean, it's nice to see the numbers for the nation, the quintiles and so on, but it's pretty abstract and pretty removed from students' personal experience. So the idea was, how do you bring this home? How do you sort of dramatize how important the stock market has been over the course of the last century and more in the economic history of the nation, particularly contributing to that concentration of wealth that has become so much more striking in the last 30 years. How do you bring that home to students in a kind of a personal way? And so, stock market simulation. Let's have them play the market under more or less real conditions of the time period. And so I started out with the simulation. It was all with Excel spreadsheets, and it was all, I had to do investor groups. This is a 100-person class. It was kind of a hassle. But they started to get something out of it even at that level. The first rendition, I think, was 2010. And after that, I applied for one of these TLT development grants and started working and got it and started working with Paul St. Dennis and especially David Tromley I have to give a shout out to because he was my research assistant for the last rendition of this. So it's really, what I'm going to spend the last part of my time doing, just showing you all that we did in the fall, what this meant, what we built, and I'm hoping you can get a flavor of what the students felt, what they experienced in going through this, and then what they got out of it. Now, I have to say, just in preface, there's a kind of a tension in doing this assignment between the game aspect, that is, who makes the most money, who comes off with the most toys, versus the learning aspect. And so I tried to separate those out very clearly, and that I would give the reward for winning the stock market game, is running up the most money, was informal. I gave them a box of cannolis to the top 6 finishers. But really, the payoff grade-wise was a reflection paper where they would think about their experience no matter how much money they made and what it says about financial history and how financial markets influence the income gap in particular. So, and actually it's kind of interesting. About half of the winners, the people who made the most money, didn't write very good papers. So whatever that says, I don't know. There are all sorts of meanings that you can come up with, and maybe I'll write something up about this. It's also kind of an exercise in historical economics, experimental economics, that is pretty cool. Okay, so let me get into this. Let me just show you the first simulation. This is the first screen that the students would encounter when they opened it up. And this is the last year for the first round was 1939. The first year was 1921. Okay, so this would be the screen that they would start with and make their investments for a given year. Now, keeping that in mind, and so you can see there are all these other buttons that they can push. I'll get into those in a second. But what they would do, they would make their choices based on actual historical documents from the time period. So, 1921, you go in here, imagine this is 1921. Everybody starts out with $1,000. And that $1,000 they can apportion among any of this, let's see, this list of stocks. This was their choices, their range of choices. Not all of them were offered. Some of them, the last ones in the list, actually came available only during the 1920s. But so they had stocks, they had particular industries to choose from, particular industries whose history they'd been studying. And they also had this to draw upon. A wiki. I made a wiki for each year. Now part of the uncertainty, you can't just do a strictly historical simulation because that kind of tips people off. They know what's going to happen. They can look up the stock's history. So you got to build in uncertainty. So they don't know what's going to happen. That's what real history is. That's how it's lived. You don't know what next year in the stock market is going to bring. So two sources of uncertainty. One is that they didn't know what the next year was going to be. So I would only put up the wiki for the first year that they were in, and then it's only after I had changed the year that they would find out what the next year is. So they're in 1925, they know the crash is happening in 1929, but they don't know if they're going to have another year of boom, or if the next year is going to be 1930, and it's going to be after the bust. So that's one source of uncertainty. The other source of uncertainty is I let the students also have a market that had an influence on the prices. So they could, if enough of them bought a stock, that cumulative effect, that group effect of buying the stock would actually kick up the price in increment. And so that would be in addition to the historical increment. So they could actually themselves, if they got together and colluded, if all of them bought the same stock, they could actually make that stock go up about twice the actual historical rise. If they all did that. They didn't. Obviously, a group of 100 people, and I did do investment groups to have them discuss and so on. But let me just show you, first of all, the wiki and how that worked. So 1921, they're starting out the game, and here is what they see. This is the welcome screen, and they can go down and they can read about what the New York Times and Moody's, which is the stock investment guide of the time, and it still is out there today, but it starts in the 1920s, what these various sources were saying about the industry itself, the overall industry, and they can choose, let's see, I'm losing my, sorry, I'm not accustomed to the, I do, but it's like going all over the place. Okay, now I'm off. I don't know where my two fingers are.
I know. I'm not.
Well, okay, anyway.
Back in, but
okay. Let's see, you got to get to the...
But what you're doing is taking them back. They're
It's-
actually entering,
that period.
time
That
warp.
wiki, it puts them right smack in the middle of that 1921 year. And all the reports are from actual New York Times articles or actual, the Moody's has nice information, summary information about where the stock has been and what the current balance sheets are and all that kind of thing. You can actually do, no, this is good. I mean, this is where I'm going next. So I'll not fool with the wiki. I hope that I can navigate this thing, though. Maybe you better stay up here. Okay, no, this is where I want to go. Okay, so they read all about their stocks and their industries at the time. They also have course readings that they've done on, there's a reading they do on the history of the stock market. So there's some tips there about what's going to happen. But here's what happens. So they play through each year, it changes, and they're able to find out what the stock history is. So this is the screen for the stock history. Now, nothing there until you start to click. Now, this is going to be, what you're going to see is up here, you can see my arrow pointing to, this is the student market plus the historical. So they can see the cumulative, what the actual price change is going to be, but they can also see what the historical is, as well as what the student market influence is separately. So for instance, General Motors. There's General Motors throughout the time period. Can I maximize this screen? Can I do that and maximize? Still, it's not very well centered in Safari, I guess. But in Firefox, you can see it is right square on, and you can see here's the years. So these are the years they played too. And you know, they really worked hard on this and came up with all sorts of, like you can add, here's Studebaker versus General Motors. And you can see Studebaker didn't do so hot. Others, one of the really interesting ones is, this is Radio Corporation of America is kind of a famous story because there was a group of historical stock buyers who actually pooled their resources to artificially elevate that price, and then they sold out and made millions. But nobody knew about this, and so a lot of people got burned. And a lot of my students, even though that was in the reading, they got burned too. So I think that kind of brought home that lesson that maybe you better go back to the reading, and you know. And okay, so here's, what does all this have to do with me? So they can all actually check out what each other are doing. So Adam, here's where he wound up, is here. He had all his stock in one thing, which is Procter & Gamble, which is actually a good stock to have over the Depression because according to our reading, that was an industry, consumer goods, cheap goods that really did well. And you know, you can check out what your fellow students are doing, what they've invested in, and so on. And so that's pretty cool. And I also have my own panel. And this was a great event, or great sort of innovation this year. 3 minutes. Okay, so yeah, okay. The great innovation was that I could actually see in advance what the price changes were going to be, and I could actually tweak things. So I could, if I saw that they were bidding for something, it was kind of getting my, we had to work a lot with what the student market impact was going to be, what that factor was going to be. And so I had to tweak it a time or two to fix that. But I can actually, you know, as the instructor, manipulate the price through this screen, and as well as see where everybody is. And then finally, here's the kicker. This is the great, you know, so dramatic for my teaching purposes, is this. The wealth distribution. Remember, everybody starts out with 1,000. Everybody starts out with 1,000. And that means all the quintiles, each fifth of the group is going to be the same. Their jaws would drop when they would see these graphs come up about how the income was skewing to the top. These financial markets and how they work, how you get a little more money and you inform yourself and you know, you can rise to the top. But so many people can't. And you really, every time we played these games, the income distribution was dramatic. 5 years of game, you know, this would be what would happen. The top would make out with the big bucks, really. And it just kept getting bigger, and so they would sort of, 1 minute. So that's the main thing I wanted to show you. I did want to show you the more recent time too, just the pattern holds even with the second round of the game we played. And you know, I think this really brought home to these students how important financial markets are to understanding, you know, when in history these gaps widen between the top and the rest, the 1%, and when they shrink. Let me just see if I can get one more thing in here for you. That is the recent times, because we did play a 1990s to 2000s version of this, and you know, it's a little bit abbreviated. There's the consultancy paper you can see, but let me just show you the wealth distribution on this. So there's the wealth distribution for 1991 to 2009. And just as a sort of a final note, most of them, they actually were able to influence the price of Apple in particular, because they all knew that Apple was a great stock. So they actually doubled the price of Apple, and that's one of the reasons all these people are wealthy, so wealthy, because they were among the ones that invested in that one stock. And they learned that one stock, putting all your money in one basket, particularly if you know it's going to rise, that's the way to the 1%. So,